my name's Katherine Ashmore and welcome to the Mindset Exchange. Have you ever considered the immense power images hold in shaping brands and influencing perceptions? In this episode, I'm joined by Steve Kraitt, brand photographer, who explores how photography can elevate the image of clients and resonate with audiences. Discover the significance of capturing authenticity and projecting desired identities through standout imagery. How does mindset impact photography? And what role does it play in crafting compelling visual stories? Stay tuned as we unravel the essence of branding beyond logos and delve into creating holistic brand experiences. Steve also shares valuable tips on establishing chemistry and mutual understanding. Plus, don't miss an intriguing book recommendation, American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis, offering profound insights into communication breakdowns and societal indifference. Tune in for a deep dive into the world of branding and authenticity and the compelling truth captured through the lens. Let's go. Hi, everyone, and welcome to brand photographer Steve Kraitt on today's episode. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And how are you?
Excited about hearing what you have to say, to be honest, Steve. Today's episode is going to be discussing all about the power of the image and the mindsets around this, and also how, with your work, actually, how it can help people either for themselves or for their own businesses with their brand image. But before we start, would you mind sharing a bit about your own journey into photography?
Sure. Originally, my career began in marketing and advertising. And as part of my duties for the company that I was working with, one of the things that I had to do was hire photographers to do shoots, campaign shoots, product shoots, that kind of thing. And that was a regular thing back then. And of course, it was all on film, and you would hire a photographer and he would come in and we'd do the setup and we'd start shooting, and you'd run a few rolls of film off and then you'd stick them on a bike to go down to central London to Metro, and they'd process them, and by lunchtime you would get the transparencies back, and everyone at lunch break would kind of crowd around my light box with their loops and start looking at the transparencies. And it always irritated me that obviously we were using Polaroids, but that was a bit of a pain as well. And it always irritated me that you couldn't shoot away and just see the pictures instantly. And then, of course, one day I hired a photographer and he came in and he said, "Oh, look what I've got." And he had one of the very first commercial digital cameras. It was a Nikon D1, I think. And he took a photo, and there it was, the photo on the back of the camera. Immediately, you could see it on a little screen on the back. And I thought, oh my God, it was a complete game changer for me. Yeah. And I went straight out, bought a digital camera and started shooting all the stuff myself, which was great because I eliminated that the kind of the middleman, which was the photographer, because I was the creative director. I was trying my best to explain to the photographer what I was looking for, but that one level of disconnect meant that you could never be sure that you were going to get exactly what you want. Whereas if I eliminated the photographer and started shooting myself, if I didn't get what I want, it's my fault. So yeah, but that was kind of how I ended up, and I was shooting for the company everything that we were doing from that point onwards. And then of course I started doing stuff on the side. And then when I exited the company and I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do now? The obvious choice was to see if I could make it as a full-time professional photographer. And I was shooting commercially. I was shooting advertising and fashion and beauty and product and that kind of stuff. And that's how I ended up doing that full-time. And since then, I've now transitioned, well, not transitioned, but slightly shifted direction more towards branding photography. And absolutely loving it. So yeah. There you go.
Yeah, an amazing journey as well. And as an amateur photographer, I love the fact that you can see and frame your photo before you take the photo. It's like an art form. And you're mentioning that you're a creative director and you could take that process, that middleman out of the equation, and you could be creative yourself. So if you're thinking of photography as an art form, how do you feel digital fits into that?
It's interesting because we're experiencing the same thing right now with AI, and everyone's getting, especially in the creative industries, everyone's getting all upset about AI. And at the end of the day, it's a tool. A digital camera is a tool. What counts is what you're trying to create. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of get a little bit confused, because there are still a lot of people shooting film and
Yeah.
producing fantastic stuff. And I walk around now with my smartphone and shoot fantastic photos with that. So really, at the end of the day, like, I'm not. I've said this before. I'm not a purist. I was never that interested in the art of processing. I was never that interested in the darkroom. It always irritated me that I couldn't see the photo as soon as I'd taken it. And of course, digital camera has enabled that and enabled me to get much more out of the whole process. So it's an interesting one. And I think in terms of the art of photography, I don't think that has changed. I don't think digital has changed the pure art of photography at all. It's just made the idea of doing it much more accessible to much more people. And I think that can only be a good thing in the end. And I think the same is to be said of AI. And you'll find that it's not the AI that's going to be eliminating creatives and producing great new creative work. It's going to be creative people using AI and doing it in such a fabulous and new and original way that they will be creating these new art forms. And I think it's important to make that distinction.
Yeah.
And of course, it's subjective. So, yeah.
Yeah. And thinking about the art form or the image, how do you feel photography influences the client's perception of themselves as well as the audience's perception?
Completely. I mean, that's partly the whole point of branding photography. It's to show the client the best version of themselves. It's like one of the reasons clients come to me is because they want me to show them the person that they're aiming to be. It's almost like, here is you in 5 years' time when you have totally killed it professionally. This is, do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, it's almost like a client comes to me, we take the pictures, I give them the pictures, and they could take the hero picture from that set and stick it on the wall or put it in a frame on their desk and look at
Yeah.
it every day. And it's a reminder for them, this is the person that I
Yeah.
am. This is the person
Yeah.
that is emerging as I go through this professional journey. And this is the best version of me that I aspire to be for myself and for all my clients. And that's a very important aspect of it. The idea of presenting them with a set of images, and they would be able to select one of those images, put it in a frame on their desk, and look at it every day and be reminded that is their objective. That is the version of themselves
Yeah.
that they aspire to be. And that is the ultimate person that is their kind of target. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's who I really am. And I am moving towards that. And that's who I am for myself and for all my clients. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's almost like it's projection, it's positive mindset. It's this is the image I want to project about what I can be.
Yeah.
And having that image not only tells myself what I am doing all of this work for, but it's projecting the values or the image that I wish my clients to perceive of me or my products, which is
Absolutely.
absolutely amazing. People often talk about what is the truth of the lens? How does the audience perceive you, your own personal confidence? And what's your viewpoint on that, Steve?
The truth of the lens. They used to say the camera never lies, but no, the camera always lied. Right back to when it was invented, it lied. But I don't know about the truth of the lens. I think it's the truth of the person or the subject is what's
Mm,
important, and even more so, It's the ability of the photographer to capture that in an authentic way. Because if you can do that, then you've succeeded. You don't need the truth of the lens or any of that kind of stuff. You just need to know that you've completely succeeded in capturing a genuine image of the character of that person. You've captured their character, you've captured their personality, but not just that, you've captured the best parts of their character and personality, the parts that they want to project outwards, the parts that they want people to see, and the parts of their character and personality that mean something about them and their business and that will attract clients to them.
I imagine you meet a whole different plethora of different clients. I know your clients are more, one would classify more in the high achiever sets, like partners, entrepreneurs, in health as well, and well-being. And when you're thinking about the different types of people that you'll get on your photo shoots, you're dealing with also the different personalities. How do you deal with a client that maybe is really camera shy, as opposed to a client that's probably a perfectionist, who's the other spectrum, where they've got in their mind's eye, this is the image that I imagine myself to be, and maybe the reality isn't that? How do you manage those sorts of clients?
So far, I haven't had any very negative experiences of that kind. I've had situations where I've had a client. I mean, the only one that comes to mind right now is I've had a client come back to me and she said, oh, she thinks she looks a little bit heavy. And I'm like, that's fine. I can make adjustments if that's what's bothering you. But I'll be honest with you, I'll tell you this now. I didn't say this to her at the time, but I think it was a case of, what do they call it? Dysphoria or dysmorphia or something, because she looked absolutely fantastic in the images and she didn't look heavy at all. So I think it was just something happening in her mind. But obviously, that's the last thing I want to say to a client. So I said to her, let me fiddle with the image a little bit and let me, as imperceptibly as possible, bring it more in line with your expectations. But admittedly, it was one image out of 100 images. And the only reason she was concerned was because I believe that her PR team wanted to use it for a local magazine cover. And she was like, no. And that's fine. People, and funnily enough, since then, one of the questions I ask all my clients before the shoot now is I always ask them, is there anything about your appearance that you personally would prefer to de-emphasize if it was possible? And is there anything particular about your appearance that you really love that you would like to enhance in the images? Because everyone has their hang-ups. Everyone, they might think their nose is too big or their hair is thin or whatever. There's always something, and it's not very often that there isn't. So I like to make sure that the client understands that I'm aware of that, and I'm aware that they might be a little bit concerned about certain things, and that I'm not going to judge them, and they can tell me, and I will make sure that it's not an issue in the final images. And I think a lot of people appreciate that. And on the other end of the scale, there's nothing like having a client who is confident naturally in front of the camera, because then it's just even easier. The whole thing becomes a breeze almost. And that, you would be surprised that most people, not most people, but I would say half the clients that I work with have a good level of confidence in front of the camera. They understand it, they embrace it. I think it's partly because they're comfortable in themselves. They know who they are, and they don't feel like they have to prove anything. They don't feel like they have to hide anything. They have that confidence naturally already. And I think, obviously, that's a dream for a photographer. And then where they're not that confident, that's my job, is to empower them, show them how great they look in the pictures.
And how do you do that, Steve?
Well, there's a lot of techniques, and there's a lot of things. It's a lot to do with communication, which is vital. I mean, look, communication is vital in life, not just in taking photos, but it's a lot about communication, particularly leading up to the shoot, holding the client's hand figuratively, making sure that they feel relaxed. That's the first step, most important. They've got to be relaxed, and try to help them have fun, because that's when you get the good shots, is when you're having fun and it's a nice relaxed atmosphere,
Yeah.
and so the camera becomes an incidental element. And I also have a setup in the studio where I have a big screen, and as I shoot, the pictures come up on the screen. I also, other techniques, like I have a full-length mirror which I shoot next to, so that the client can see themselves and can adjust their posture and their positioning and their look to suit how they feel and suit themselves. And that helps a lot. Music helps a lot. The first question I ask when a client arrives in the studio is, what kind of music do you like? And that's what we listen to. Thankfully, I haven't had anyone request any thrash metal yet, but that will happen.
So obviously creating a wonderful environment helps, and you, from what I'm hearing, give a lot of verbal communication to help them feel at ease and comfortable, and physical techniques as well to help them adjust themselves. In your own personal journey, a lot of people talk about, as an artist, having that resilience mindset when you first start out.
Sure.
Would you mind talking a bit more about that, Steve?
Mindset, it's interesting because I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and I see a lot of discussion of things like imposter syndrome. And I completely appreciate that this is a thing, and that a lot of creatives suffer from this kind of thing, or something related, to varying degrees and varying extents. But and I feel for them, and I understand where it's coming from. Funnily enough, and I count myself very, very lucky, I've never really suffered from that. And I have never had to find ways to persuade myself that what I'm doing doesn't have at least a little bit of value. And also, I'm of the opinion that if you're going to do anything, if you're ever going to do anything, you do the best that you can. Otherwise, why bother doing it? It doesn't matter if it's shooting a beauty campaign or making a bowl of pasta. It doesn't matter what it is you're doing. If you're going to do it properly and do it right and do the best job you can do. And if you approach everything that way, if it doesn't work out or if it fails, you can never say to yourself, well, I didn't try my best. I did everything I could do. It failed. What can I learn from that? Let's move on. And I think that's mindset, I guess. That's a lot to do with how I approach everything. And the other thing is, nobody cares. And it sounds kind of brutal, but the truth about this kind of thing is nobody really cares. This is something, it's like posting on social media or putting your work out into the world. Nobody really cares. And if someone sees it and really loves it, then that's great, and they will ideally make that known. But for all the other people that don't care, what's the difference? It makes no difference at all. And I'm not doing it for them. So I guess that's another element of the mindset. It's an interesting one, because I know a lot of people really struggle with, I guess, the idea that they're being judged in some way. And I'm like, yeah, bring it on. Judge me. Go ahead, judge me, because it ain't going to make no difference to what I'm doing.
And one could say that's an example of growth mindset, Steve, actually, where you take on board criticism or constructive criticism or feedback and use it as a tool to propel yourself forward, either learning from it or thinking, actually, I've got my own vision, having that confidence to feel clear on my vision and on my path, and think, actually, there will always be naysayers, but I'm going to focus on my thing.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, this is the interesting thing. My personal opinion about feedback is that it's not abuse. Particularly if you're a pure creative, if you're an artist and you're creating something for yourself, and expressing something, then feedback is not helpful, and in some cases it's dangerous, because every single person that gives you feedback is going to have a slightly different opinion, slightly different taste, slightly different approach, slightly different mood when they give you the feedback, etc., etc., etc. And invariably, as soon as you start playing to the gallery, do you understand what I mean? As soon as you start creating, engaging in an artistic endeavor in order to please someone else, then stop, forget it, because that's not the point. And when you're providing a service for a client, which is not purely creative, is not creating art, you're solving a problem, but that client has come to you because they appreciate your creative sensibility, then similarly, the same kind of mindset ought to apply. And ultimately, it's that client that you have to satisfy, no one else. And if you stay true to your own aesthetic, then that will happen automatically in theory. So that's why feedback is a tricky one.
Thank you for sharing that perspective, because it's a really interesting viewpoint as a creative. You've got to hold on to that creative vision, and people will give feedback, but I guess depends whether the feedback's about the work or not.
Well, this is it. I make a point. I will rarely ask for feedback. I won't ask for it. But it's often offered. When it is, I politely accept it, and I will listen to it, and I will take it on board, and very likely later completely disregard it. But I'm not negative about it. It's nice if someone has an opinion about your work, then fine, that's great. At least you move them enough for them to give you an opinion.
Exactly. And one of the things we've talked off podcast, if it's okay if I can share it, is you talked about the fact that you are a perfectionist. And I think that this is actually quite an interesting angle to discuss, because in some cases, perfectionism can be seen as a negative. But when it comes to photography, it can actually be a positive. And would you mind exploring that a bit with me now, Steve?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of different elements to that, a lot of different facets to it. When I say I'm a perfectionist, I like to think that I have control over perfectionism. It doesn't have control over me. And that's a very important part. And of course, coming from an advertising background, particularly beauty, where perfection, taking into account the cycles of fashion through the worlds of advertising, as everyone knows, like fashion, it goes through these cycles. And when I was shooting a lot of beauty, it was in that cycle where everything is utterly perfect in a hyper real and stunningly gorgeous and beautiful, and the lighting, the retouching, everything utterly perfect. And that's where a lot of that with me comes from. And I like that aesthetic, and I enjoy doing it, and I enjoy looking at it. But of course, that would be completely over the top for personal branding. But it doesn't mean that there is a point at which a personal branding shot is also perfect. It just means something slightly different. But that again swings back round to what I was saying before about if you're going to do something, do the very best you can do. And perfectionism, when you're fully aware of it and you have control over it, is a very useful thing. And also, of course, my idea of perfection might be completely different from somebody else's. And that's also worth bearing in mind. So I know a lot of people say, oh, perfectionism, and I can never finish anything. But I don't think that's perfectionism. I think that's something different. I think that's a fear of finishing something for whatever reason. There could be any reason, or maybe because you know that when you finish it, then you have to put it out in the world, and maybe that's what you have a fear of. So you're constantly refining. So I think that's something else.
Yeah. You've moved into branding. A lot of people listening, they may know about branding and they may not know about branding. And a lot of people think of branding as basically a logo. Can you explain what it means, what branding photography means?
Wow.
And I think quite a big
Well,
thing, I
branding.
know.
Yeah, well, this is the
Yeah.
thing, and branding is a term which is used very loosely by
Mm.
many, many different people and types of people. And I don't want to start any arguments, but my idea of branding generally is that it's how a company or a product, it's how they make someone feel. I think that's what branding is ultimately. That's the ultimate objective, is that when someone mentions the name of a product or a brand, it instantly makes you feel a certain way and makes you understand something in a certain way. Just a logo is a logo. A logo is meaningless without the brand behind it and the branding behind it. And it's also so much more. It's also a strategy. It's so much more than just an image or a name. It's an entire experience. And it takes a great deal of collateral and time to really create a knockout brand. And what I provide is a part of that collateral. I don't do the whole thing, but I provide a very important element, which is the visual identity, or part of the visual identity. And when it comes to branding photography, again, it comes back to that idea of capturing the essence or the personality of a person or a company in an image. And one of the best ways to do that is to tell a story. And that's also, again, coming back to what a brand is generally. It's a story.
Yeah.
It's a story about something. And a lot of people will disagree with me, and that's fine. But as far as I'm concerned, it's one of those very ethereal things that you can't nail down just to
Yeah.
one or two things. It's a holistic combination of many, many different things. And what I provide fits into that, but it's not the whole story.
Thinking about the power of the image and how this fits in within branding. What I'm hearing you saying, it's about how this image allows people to feel, think, and view you as a person and what you want to convey. And that
Mm.
is really powerful.
No, absolutely. And of course,
Yeah.
it comes back to that thing. There are certain photographs that you can look at every day and just they don't do anything for you. And you might not even remember them if you stop looking at them. And there's other photographs you just see for a split second and it will stay with you your entire life. And that is, well, in relation to branding, I wouldn't want to say that that's what you need to get to if you want to create a brand image, but you want to create something that stops people and that stops the scroll, basically, is what we're talking about as well. But you want to
Mm.
create an image that stops people and has impact, and they go, wow, who's that? Or what's that about? Or, oh, that's the person I want to work with. They look
Absolutely.
really cool.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's what it comes down to.
And that is an interesting point, what you were saying about in today's society, when we're thinking about the modern world and the access not only to being able to photograph so easily, but also the prevalence of so much information online. It's like, how do you stand out?
Mm.
How do you stand out as a person, one person amongst millions of others, when you're trying to get your business across or you're trying to get yourself across? And what it is by having that standout image. Is that something you discuss with clients when you do the initial briefing? Is that something you talk about?
Well, it's something that's kind of inherent in
Yeah.
how I promote myself and what I provide. So
Mm.
yes, I would hope that's one of the reasons why a client has contacted me in the first place, because that's one of the things that they want. But of course, yeah, that idea of standing out and that idea of rising above your competition. And yes, the competition is insane. And and so any means, but whatever means you can employ to give you a competitive advantage, you should be employing. And one of the most obvious ones is a visual identity that really stops people in their tracks. And it doesn't have to be wild or mad. It just has to be really impactful and a little bit original or different or stand out in some way. But then, of course, don't forget that your differentiator is not just visual. It has to be in your offering. And that, again, is another element that part of the mix, so to speak. So, yeah, that's another thing.
It's that thing, isn't it, of what I think so powerful about photography is you see an image and you immediately get that sense that comes across. And so when one talks about, and what we've been talking about earlier, how you differentiate yourself, you're also talking about how to be authentic, because actually, if you are the product, then the only differentiator is what you bring to the party. So it's about being authentically yourself in front of the camera. Do you ever talk about clients' values in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things in the chemistry call that I will talk about and we'll find out. I do have a little questionnaire thingy, and one of the questions is to pick 5 words. And it's always very interesting because in some cases, the client won't be fully aware of exactly what it is that they represent entirely and exactly how they want to differentiate themselves. And that's interesting. And the differentiator is a very interesting thing. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently as well, because it's not an easy thing to get, first of all, to get your head around, and second of all, to actually engage with and establish for yourself. So that aspect of it is quite interesting. And I've been thinking about a lot lately about, okay, so what are my differentiators specifically? And how do I encapsulate that in a single headline? Because that, again, that's another element of the whole branding thing. And being able to impart what you are all about in 8 words or less, along with that fantastic knockout image. It's a very holistic endeavor, and it incorporates a lot of different skill and a lot of different ways of thinking.
And if someone was starting on that journey and they're thinking, right, I'm going to be launching my own business, or actually, I agree, I think I need to have some knockout imagery of myself and stand out a bit from the crowd, what would your advice be to them about how to, obviously, clearly go to you, but how to source a good photographer?
I think the most important thing is that you get on with them. Is that you will know this pretty much straight away on the first phone call. There's either, that's why I kind of call it now a chemistry call, because there's either a bit of chemistry or there isn't. And I think it's very, very important because, like I said before, it's a transactional process. There is giving and taking going on when you are in the midst of a photo shoot. And it's very important, that aspect of it. And it's important that there is a mutual understanding, and you've got to like the person that you're with to some extent in order to get the best out of them. And I also often say to clients, especially those that are a little less confident, I say, if you want to bring someone along, bring a best friend or a family member or someone that can be your cheerleader during the shoot. I absolutely encourage that because it really does help the client relax and have more fun. I think that's an important element. Definitely. There has to be some chemistry there.
Yeah. Chemistry and fun. I think those are great words to finish off. I'm going to ask you one last question, if that's okay, Steve.
Sure.
If you were going to recommend one book, what would it be and why?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because I know that a lot of people on these podcasts, it's this self-help book or that self-help book. It's all self-help books. And I don't think I've ever read a self-help book in my life, apart from How to Make Friends and Influence People, that Dale Carnegie classic book, which I would be tempted to say as, my recommendation, but I'm not going to because that would be really boring. I'm thinking about this, and I used to read a huge amount of fiction pre-internet. I used to read a lot. And now mostly what I read is articles online. kind of a shame. And I'd like to get back to reading at some point. But one book that had a huge influence on me, and this is going to sound a bit strange, is the Bret Easton Ellis book, American Psycho. And the reason that it had such an influence on me is because I think a lot of people completely misunderstood what that book was actually about. Because for me, what it's actually about is a total and utter breakdown of communication. It's about a world in which people completely do not listen to each other at all. Nobody cares at all about anything that anyone else is saying. Every single person is completely wrapped up in their own little bubble. And I found it quite fascinating that, and this leads on to this whole thing about people really don't care. Most people don't care about what you're doing until they need you. And that's when clients will reach out and contact who they need, because suddenly they realize, I need this. And then they care about what you do. But up until that point, they don't care, and neither does anyone else. And I'm not saying that in a nasty, derogatory way. It's just a fact of life. That's how most people operate. They only need you when they need you. And that's fine. And I think that American Psycho book really opened up my eyes to that whole idea of like, everyone is talking and talking and talking, and no one is paying any attention to anything. So much so that a guy can go around slaughtering people and not get noticed. And yeah, also a very entertaining book, very well written. But there you go. I think I'm going to choose that one because I'm sure a lot of people are going to have a go at me about that.
Yeah, a very powerful book and also a very powerful film and a very interesting insight. I could listen to you talk all day, Steve. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your insights. They've been truly amazing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure to be here, and call me anytime. Happy to talk more.
Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for tuning into the Mindset Exchange podcast. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed this week's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe and comment on your podcast platform wherever you are. And if confidence is something you'd like to explore further or work on further, I'm going to be running a free webinar called Building Unshakable Confidence on Wednesday the 10th of July at 7 p.m. GMT. I'll put the link in the blurb. Remember, in a sea of images, it's the ones that speak with authenticity and resonate deeply that stand out. See you next time.